The restraints dug into David Reed's wrists as the transport ship began its descent. Through the narrow viewport he could see the planet below covered in forests that looked purple under the alien sun. 3 Insecta Chitauri magistrates sat across from him, their compound eyes reflecting no emotion. "You understand the sentence," the lead magistrate clicked in his translator. "Natural justice, the Thornback Ranges, will decide your fate." David said nothing. Words hadn't helped. During the trial, the merchant who attacked him had connections. David's crime was defending himself against someone important. Now he would pay for that mistake. "Humans claim to be adaptable," another magistrate added. "We shall see. The Raven Claws have never failed to deliver justice." The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. David had heard stories about the Thornback Ranges during his 3 months on this world, a forest preserve where the Chitauri kept their most dangerous predators. Tourists watched from orbit as the creatures hunted. No one entered the forest. Those who did never left. 6 hours, the third magistrate said. "That is the longest anyone has survived. We will retrieve your remains tomorrow." David looked at his hands. They were steady. He thought about his grandfather back on Earth teaching him to hunt in the Montana wilderness. The old man's voice echoed in his memory. "Predators aren't evil, David. They're just doing what they need to do. You show them respect, stay calm, and sometimes they'll leave you alone. Sometimes they'll even accept you." The ship landed in a clearing surrounded by massive trees. Their bark was dark gray, almost black and bioluminescent. Moss grew in patches that glowed faintly. Even in daylight, the air smelled wrong. When the door opened, not bad, just different, sweeter somehow. A Chitauri guard handed David a small pack knife, water purifier, emergency beacon, standard exile provisions. "Generous," David muttered. "The beacon is so we can find your body," the guard replied without humor. They pushed him out. The ship lifted, immediately leaving him standing alone. In violet-tinged shadows, David shouldered the pack and turned slowly, scanning his surroundings. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. He knelt and examined the ground. Tracks everywhere, large ones, 4 toes in front, 2 in back. Each print was the size of his head. Claw marks at the tips, deep gouges in the soil. Something big walked on 6 legs. "Here recently." David moved to the nearest tree and found scratches in the bark, high up. "Maybe 8 ft, territorial marking." He touched the edges of the cuts, still sticky with sap, fresh. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "They know I'm here." His grandfather had taught him to read sign, deer tracks, bear scat, wolf trails. The principles were the same everywhere. Animals left messages in the landscape. You just had to know how to read them. David followed the tree line, staying in the clearing but examining the forest edge. More claw marks, more tracks. Pattern emerged. This clearing was a boundary. Multiple creatures used it, but none stayed long. Neutral ground, maybe. He found a stream trickling from between 2 rocks and tested the water. Cold and clear. The purifier would work if needed. But the water looked clean. David filled his bottle and kept moving. The cave entrance was almost hidden behind a fallen log. David approached, carefully listening. Nothing inside. He checked the opening. More claw marks, but old ones worn smooth by weather. This place had been abandoned. He crawled inside and found a space big enough to stand in, dry, protected. Good shelter, too good, David's instinct screamed at him. In Montana, you didn't take another predator's den. Not unless you wanted a fight. But he had no choice. Night was coming. The violet light was fading to deeper purple. He could see bioluminescent plants starting to glow brighter in the growing darkness. David gathered branches and piled them loosely at the cave entrance. Not a barrier, they wouldn't stop anything serious, but they would make noise if something pushed through. An early warning system. He sat just inside the entrance, knife in hand, and waited. The forest came alive at dusk, sounds he couldn't identify, howls in the distance, something large moving through underbrush, clicks and whistles that might have been communication. Then he saw them, eyes reflecting the bioluminescent glow, multiple sets. Watching from the darkness, they were positioned in a semicircle around his cave, surrounding him. David counted at least 8 pairs of eyes. They didn't move closer, just watched, studying him. He forced himself to breathe slowly. His grandfather's voice again. Fear smells different than calm. Predators can tell. You panic, you become prey. You stay calm, you become a puzzle. Puzzles are interesting. One pair of eyes moved closer than the others, larger, brighter, the alpha. Maybe. David could see a shape now. Massive shoulders, a head that swayed slightly as it approached, 6 legs moving in perfect coordination. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing. David could hear its breathing, deep and slow. It was testing him, waiting to see what he would do. David did nothing. He sat perfectly still, knife resting across his knees, and met those eyes without challenging them. Not aggressive, not afraid, just present. Minutes passed. The creature huffed once, a sound like steam escaping. Then it settled onto its haunches and continued watching. David smiled slightly. First test passed. He was still alive, still interesting enough not to kill immediately. The night stretched ahead of him. Sleep would be dangerous, but exhaustion would be worse. He needed rest eventually. For now, he would sit with the predators and show them he understood their world. Patience first, understanding second. Trust would come later if he survived long enough. The eyes watched him through the darkness. David watched back. Somewhere above, Chitori satellites recorded everything. The magistrates would be disappointed tomorrow when they came for a body and found him still breathing. David intended to disappoint them for a long time. Dawn broke with purple light filtering through the canopy. David hadn't slept. The eyes had watched him all night, never blinking, never moving closer. When the light grew strong enough, they simply faded back into the forest without sound. He stretched carefully, feeling every muscle protest. The cave floor had been hard and cold. His back ached, but he was alive, and that mattered more than comfort. David stepped out of the cave and examined the clearing in daylight. The tracks were clearer now, 6-legged prints everywhere circling his shelter. In overlapping patterns, they had been close, very close, close enough to kill him a dozen times over. They chose not to. That was important. He ate a ration bar from his pack and drank from his water bottle. The stream burbled nearby, a constant background noise. David walked to it and knelt, refilling his bottle. Movement caught his eye upstream. A creature stood on the opposite bank. Drinking, it looked like a deer crossed, with an armadillo covered in overlapping plates of natural armor, 6 legs just like the predator's. It raised its head and stared at David with dark eyes. Neither of them moved. The creature seemed to decide David wasn't a threat and returned to drinking. When it finished, it ambled away into the underbrush. Prey animals were calm here. That told David something. This stream was neutral territory, a place where hunting didn't happen. Every wilderness had places like this, water sources where nature called a truce. He spent the morning exploring, always keeping the cave in sight. The forest followed patterns, game trails wound between trees, scat-marked territories. Scratches on bark indicated boundaries. It was like reading a map written in claw marks and scent. Around midday, David found a ridge overlooking the clearing. He climbed it, carefully using roots and rocks for handholds. At the top, he turned to survey his new home. The creature was already there. David froze. The raven claw stood 15 ft away, massive and utterly still. It was easily the size of a grizzly bear, but longer, more streamlined. 6 legs ended in clawed feet. Its head was wedge-shaped with powerful jaws. Spikes ran down its back ridge, broken and healed in places. Scars marked its hide. This was the alpha, the one with the larger eyes from last night. David's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to remain motionless. Running would trigger a chase response. Fighting would be suicide. There was only one option. He slowly sat down, cross-legged, and looked away from the creature, not at the ground in submission, but to the side, acknowledging its presence without challenging it. The raven claw's breathing changed, became curious rather than predatory. It took a step closer, then another. David kept his eyes averted, his breathing steady. His grandfather's voice whispered in his memory. Wolves decide rank through posture. You don't submit completely, but you don't challenge either. You show respect. The creature circled him. David heard each footfall, felt the ground vibrate slightly under its weight. Hot breath touched his neck as it sniffed him, smelling for fear, maybe for aggression, for something that would tell it what this strange creature was. 20 minutes passed. The Ravenclaw completed 3 full circles, sniffing, observing, testing. David's legs cramped, sweat ran down his back, but he didn't move. Finally, the creature huffed again and took a step back. David risked a glance. Ravenclaw was watching him with what might have been curiosity. One of the spikes on its back was broken, jutting at an odd angle, an old injury that healed wrong. David slowly reached into his pack. Ravenclaw tensed. He moved even slower, pulling out a piece of dried meat from his rations. Not much, but something. He held it up so the creature could see, then gently tossed it halfway between them. The meat landed on the moss with a soft thud. The Ravenclaw stared at the offering, then at David, then back at the meat. It approached cautiously, sniffed the dried meat, and ate it in one bite. Those jaws could have easily taken David's arm off. Instead, they delicately consumed the small offering. The creature looked at David again. Something changed in its posture, less tense, more curious. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest without a sound. David let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His hands were shaking. He gripped his knees until they stopped. Above him, satellites recorded everything in the Chitauri government complex. Magistrates watched in silence. This shouldn't be happening. The human should be dead. The Ravenclaw should have torn him apart the first night. Instead, he was still alive, still learning, still adapting. David climbed down from the ridge and returned to his cave. He spent the afternoon gathering edible plants. Some looked similar to earth varieties, berries that passed the poison test, roots that smelled safe. He couldn't live on ration bars forever. As evening approached, he built a small fire near the cave entrance, not inside, where smoke would choke him, but close enough to provide light and warmth. The eyes returned at dusk, more of them. This time, David counted 12 pairs. Alpha's eyes were easy to identify now. Larger, more reflective, positioned at the front of the group. David sat by his fire, openly visible. He roasted a root he had found, ate it slowly, and watched the watchers. One of the younger Ravenclaws crept closer than the others, smaller maybe. Adolescent, it sniffed toward the fire, curious about the flames. The Alpha made a low rumbling sound. The youngster retreated immediately. David smiled. Pack hierarchy. The Alpha was maintaining control, keeping the curious ones from doing something stupid. It was protecting them from potential danger, and maybe protecting David from being overwhelmed. He pulled out another piece of dried meat and tossed it toward the Alpha. It landed in the space between the fire and the forest. The Alpha waited, then moved forward and took it. This time it didn't retreat immediately. It settled down just outside the firelight and watched David with those intelligent eyes. The rest of the pack followed the Alpha's lead. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, lying down but staying alert, guarding, or maybe just keeping watch. David lay down near his fire, using his pack as a pillow. The knife stayed in his hand, but he wasn't sure he would need it anymore. Above him, stars appeared between the gaps in the canopy, different stars than Earth's, a different sky over a different world. But the situation felt familiar, a human and predators finding a way to coexist, learning each other's language, building something that might become trust. David closed his eyes and let exhaustion take him. The Ravenclaws kept watch through the night. When he woke the next morning, they were gone again, but in the dirt near his fire, he found a gift. A haunch of meat, fresh, still warm. The pack had hunted and shared their kill with him. David looked into the forest and nodded. Once, message received. He wasn't prey anymore. He was something else. Something the Ravenclaws hadn't decided on yet. But he was becoming part of their world. One careful gesture at a time. The 7th day in the Thornback Ranges started with screaming. David jerked awake, knife already in hand. The sound came from deep in the forest, high-pitched and desperate, not human, animal, something in pain. He grabbed his pack and ran toward the noise. His relationship with the Ravenclaws had grown over the past week. They brought him meat. He shared his fire. They watched over him at night. He helped them track prey during the day. But this was different. This was distress. David burst through a thicket and found the source. A young Ravenclaw, maybe half-grown, was tangled in a mass of thorned vines. The plants had wrapped around its legs and torso, hundreds of barbed thorns digging into flesh. The more it struggled, the tighter they pulled. Blood matted its fur. The creature's Eyes were wide with panic. The pack surrounded the scene at a distance, 8 adults including the alpha with the broken spike. They paced and rumbled but didn't approach. The mother, David guessed, was closest. She snarled at the vines, at her trapped offspring, at everything. David assessed the situation. The thorns were wicked, curved backward like fish hooks. Pulling would tear flesh. Vines were thick, woody, strong. This wasn't a simple rescue. He stepped forward. The mother whirled on him, teeth bared, a warning. Her cub was in danger, and David was an unknown factor. David stopped and held up his hands, palms out, no threat. He pointed at the trapped juvenile, then at his knife, then made a cutting motion. The mother watched him. David could see her thinking, weighing options. Her cub was dying. The vines were draining its energy. She couldn't free it herself. Her claws were too big, too blunt for this delicate work. She stepped aside. David approached the trapped Ravenclaw, slowly, talking in a low, steady voice. Easy, I know it hurts. I'm going to help. Stay still if you can. The juvenile thrashed weakly. David knelt beside it and began examining the vines. They covered nearly every inch of the creature's body. This would take time, a lot of time. He started with the vines around the neck. Those were the most dangerous. He slid his knife under the woody stem and cut carefully, avoiding the skin beneath. The vine released with a snap. The juvenile gasped. One vine down, dozens to go. The mother settled nearby, watching every movement. The alpha stood behind her, motionless but alert. The rest of the pack formed a protective circle. David was surrounded by apex predators, while he worked on their most vulnerable member. One wrong move, and they would tear him apart. He understood that. They understood that he understood. He kept cutting. Each vine had to be traced to its root, followed to where it anchored in the ground, then severed. Carefully, the thorns bit into his hands. Blood mixed with the juvenile's blood. His fingers cramped. 2 hours passed, then 3. The sun climbed higher, turning the violet light to lavender. David's water ran out. His hands shook with exhaustion. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop. This was the test, not of strength or speed or violence, a test of commitment, of whether he truly cared about the pack or just used them for survival. The mother brought him water in her mouth, stored in a pouch in her cheek. She spit it onto the ground near him. David cupped his hands and drank what he could. It tasted like metal and earth, but it was wet. He nodded his thanks and returned to work. By the 4th hour, the juvenile was mostly free. Only the legs remained tangled. David worked on the hind legs first, the least vital. The creature had stopped struggling. It watched him with dark eyes, breathing hard but no longer panicking. Almost done, David murmured. You're doing great. The final vine came free as the sun reached its peak. The juvenile staggered upright, wobbled, and nearly fell. Its mother was there, immediately supporting it with her body. David backed away, giving them space. He was covered in blood, both his and the Ravenclaw's. His hands were torn up. He could barely grip his knife anymore. The mother turned to look at him. She made a sound, low and rumbling. Then she approached, her injured cub leaning against her. David held perfectly still. She was close enough that he could feel her breath, close enough to kill him before he could react. Instead, she touched her forehead to his. Shoulder a gentle bump, contact without aggression. The alpha approached from behind, and the same forehead to David's other shoulder. David's eyes stung. He recognized the gesture from watching the pack. It was how they greeted each other, how they showed acceptance. He was pack now. Truly pack. The juvenile wobbled over and bumped its small head against David's chest. Then it licked his bloody hands. One by one the other raven claws approached and touched him, forehead to shoulder to arm to hand, accepting him fully into their group. When the ritual finished, the mother picked up David's knife in her jaws. Carefully, gently, she carried it to him and dropped it at his feet. David picked it up with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered. The pack moved as one toward the stream. The mother half carried her cub. David followed at a distance, giving them space but staying close. At the stream they all drank. The neutral ground now felt different. Sacred almost, a place of healing and peace. David washed his hands in the cold water, watching the blood swirl away. Downstream, the cuts would scar. He would carry marks from this day forever. Above him in orbit, Chitauri observers scrambled to understand what they had witnessed. The magistrates convened emergency meetings. This was unprecedented, impossible. Raven claws didn't bond with other species. They were territorial, aggressive, solitary, except for their own kind. Yet here was a human, bloodied and exhausted, surrounded by pack that treated him as one of their own. That night David didn't sleep in his cave. He slept in the clearing, surrounded by warm bodies. Raven claws formed a circle around him, sharing their heat. The juvenile curled against his side, already healing. David stared up at the alien stars and felt something he hadn't felt since his arrest. Peace, purpose, belonging. He wasn't a prisoner anymore, wasn't in exile. He was pack, and pack protected each other no matter the cost. The alpha lifted its head and howled, a long mournful sound that echoed through the forest. The pack joined in, voices blending in harmony. David listened and smiled. He didn't have the vocal cords to match their song, but he hummed along, adding his voice to theirs in the only way he could. The forest sang with them, and for the first time since arriving on this alien world, David Reed felt like he had come home. 3 weeks had passed since David freed the juvenile from the thorned vines. The pack moved through the forest like water flowing downhill, smooth and coordinated. David moved with them, learning their rhythms and patterns. He could read their body language now. The alpha's ear twitches meant caution. The mother's low growls indicated concern for the juvenile. The younger male's playful nips at each other signaled all was well. They hunted together. David didn't have claws or powerful jaws, but he had hands and a brain that planned ahead. He showed them how to drive prey toward ambush points, how to use terrain for advantage. The pack learned quickly. In return, they taught him their world, which plants were safe, which trails led to water, which parts of the forest belonged to other more dangerous predators. David sat on his usual ridge, watching the sunset. The alpha rested beside him, a comfortable silence between them. The juvenile, now mostly healed, practiced stalking techniques with 2 other young raven claws below. Then the alpha's head snapped up, its ears flattened, a growl started deep in its chest. David followed its gaze, movement in the forest to the east. not prey too deliberate, too organized. Ravenclaws, a different pack, larger than David's group. The alpha stood and howled, not the mournful song from before. This was a warning, a challenge. The pack assembled, immediately forming defensive positions. David counted the approaching Ravenclaws. 12, maybe 13. They moved in formation, disciplined and aggressive. Their alpha led from the front, a massive creature, covered in scars. One eye was milky white, blind, but the other eye burned with intensity. The packs faced each other across the clearing. David's group numbered 8 adults plus 3 juveniles. They were outnumbered. In normal circumstances, the smaller pack would retreat. Territory wasn't worth dying for. They would fade into the forest, find new hunting grounds, rebuild. But David's alpha didn't retreat. It stood firm, broken spike raised, teeth bared. Because of David, he realized it. Suddenly, the alpha wouldn't abandon him. Pack didn't abandon pack. The rival alpha snarled and took a step forward. David's alpha matched its step for step. David's mind raced. He couldn't fight 13 Ravenclaw. His knife was useless against creatures that weighed 500 lb each, but he wasn't helpless. He had other tools, other skills. He remembered wolf pack dynamics from Earth. Wolves rarely fought to the death. Territory disputes were psychological displays of strength, intimidation. The pack that seemed stronger usually won without bloodshed. David needed to make his pack seem stronger. He grabbed dry branches from his firewood pile and jammed them into the ground in a rough semicircle behind his pack. Then he struck his fire starter and lit them. Flames roared to life, creating a wall of fire at their backs. The rival pack hesitated. Fire was unpredictable, dangerous. They had seen David use it before, but never like this. David wasn't done. He grabbed rocks and began throwing them, not at the rival Ravenclaws, but to their sides, creating noise, confusion. He shouted, making himself sound larger and more threatening than he was. His alpha understood immediately. It howled again, and the pack joined in. The sound doubled, tripled, echoed off the trees and the fire behind them. The rival pack faltered. They couldn't count properly through the smoke and noise. How many Ravenclaws did this territory actually hold? The fire suggested resources they didn't have. The strange two-legged creature suggested unknown dangers. David climbed onto a rock, making himself visible. He spread his arms wide and shouted, again, his voice cracking with effort. The rival alpha's good eye fixed on him, calculating, weighing risks. David met its gaze and didn't look away. He poured every ounce of confidence he had into that stare. This is our territory. You are not welcome. Leave now or face consequences. The standoff lasted 5 minutes 10. The fires burned lower but still flickered. David's pack held formation, bolstered by his display. Finally, the rival alpha snorted and turned its head. Submission, not full retreat, but acknowledgement that this fight wasn't worth the cost. It backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact with David's alpha. Its pack followed, flowing back into the forest like shadows. But they didn't leave entirely. David could see them settling into positions just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. The alpha approached David and bumped its head against his chest. Gratitude and respect mixed together. "We're not done," David said quietly. "They're still there." He was right. Over the next 2 days, the rival pack tested them constantly. Quick raids to steal prey, threatening displays at the territory borders. Psychological warfare designed to break their resolve. David's pack was exhausted. The juveniles couldn't rest properly. The adults took turns on guard duty. Food ran low because hunting required too much time away from defending. David watched the pattern and formed a plan. He approached the alpha during a quiet moment and tried to communicate using gestures and the few Ravenclaw sounds he had learned. He pointed at the rival pack's position, then at his alpha, then made a gesture of dominance, not aggression, submit, not fight. The alpha tilted its head, confused. David tried again. He acted out a confrontation, but instead of showing violence, he showed restraint, control. The stronger pack didn't need to kill to prove dominance. Understanding flickered in the alpha's eyes. That night, when the rival pack tested their borders again, David's alpha didn't respond with fury. It walked forward calmly, deliberately, and faced the rival alpha alone. David held his breath. This could go very wrong. The 2 alphas circled each other. Tension crackled in the air. Then David's alpha did something unexpected. It pinned the rival alpha, jaws at its throat, and held the position for 3 seconds. Long enough to kill, long enough to prove it could kill. Then it released and stepped back. The rival alpha lay still for a moment, processing what had happened. It had been defeated but allowed to live. Mercy was more powerful than death. Message was clear: I am stronger, but I choose peace. The rival alpha rose slowly and touched its forehead to David's alpha's shoulder. Submission, acceptance. The 2 packs merged that night. The rival Ravenclaws, now subordinate, integrated into the group. David's pack doubled in size. His alpha led them all. David sat by his fire and watched the enlarged pack settle into new positions. The former rival alpha approached him cautiously. David remained still. The creature sniffed him, studying this strange 2-legged thing that had changed the rules of engagement. Then it too touched its forehead to David's shoulder. Another voice joined the pack song. Another life added to their number. Above, Chitauri satellites recorded everything. Analysis teams struggled to explain the data. The human wasn't just surviving, he was transforming their most sacred preserve into something new, something unprecedented. The magistrates called for David's extraction. They argued he was contaminating the natural order. Others argued he was revealing something they had never understood. Ravenclaws weren't mindless killers. They were intelligent beings capable of complex social structures. The debate raged in government chambers, while David slept surrounded by 20 Ravenclaws, all watching over him. Through the night, he had become something the Chitauri never expected, not a victim of their justice system, not a cautionary tale. A bridge between species, a teacher without words, a pack member who proved that family transcended biology. And the forest, for the first time in recorded history, was learning to share its space with something other than violence. 2 months in the Thornback Ranges had changed David in ways he hadn't expected. His hands were calloused from climbing and tool-making. His body was leaner, harder. He moved quietly through the forest now, reading signs that would have been invisible to him before. The pack had grown to 23 Ravenclaws. 3 packs had merged under his alphas. Leadership, they controlled a territory 5 times larger than before. Prey was abundant, the juveniles were thriving. David had even begun teaching them simple tool use, rocks to crack open, shelled creatures, branches to extend. Their reach, they learned faster than he expected. The forest had found a new balance. Predators still hunted, but wastefully. Killing had stopped. The pack took what they needed and left. The rest, other species, noticed and adjusted their behavior accordingly. David was checking snare traps near the northern boundary when he heard the sound, mechanical, out of place. Transport engine. He climbed a tree quickly using skills the Ravenclaws had inadvertently taught him. From his perch he spotted the ship. Small, unmarked, landing in a clearing half a mile away. This was illegal. The Chitauri government had declared the Thornback ranges off-limits after David's integration with the pack. No one was supposed to enter. David dropped from the tree and howled. Not perfectly, but close enough. Pack would hear and understand. Danger. Unknown threat, rally point. He moved toward the landing site, staying in cover. The Ravenclaws materialized from the forest around him, silent as shadows. The Alpha took point. David followed close behind. They reached the clearing and watched. From concealment, 6 Chitauri emerged from the transport, wearing research gear and carrying equipment, tranquilizer, rifles, cages, scientific instruments. David's jaw clenched. He had seen this before. Researchers exploiting legal loopholes, claiming their work was essential. They would take specimens, run tests, cause pain in the name of knowledge. One of the researchers set up a device and activated it. A high-pitched frequency pierced the air. The Ravenclaws around David flinched and backed away, shaking their heads. A sonic lure, drawing creatures in against their will. 3 Ravenclaws from a younger pack stumbled into the clearing, disoriented. The researchers shot them immediately with tranquilizer darts. The Ravenclaws collapsed, twitching. Rage flooded through David. These were his pack, his family, and these strangers were treating them like specimens. The Alpha growled low and dangerous. Rest of the pack tensed, ready to attack. David raised his hand. Wait. Violence would end badly. The researchers had weapons designed to stop Ravenclaws. Direct assault would result in more pack members tranquilized or worse. He needed a different approach. David stepped out of the forest into the clearing. The researchers spun, startled. "You're trespassing," David said in Chitauri. His pronunciation was rough, but understandable. He had been practicing by listening to orbital communications on his emergency beacon. "You're the human," one researcher said, lowering his tranquilizer rifle. "David Reed, we thought you were dead." "I'm not, and you need to leave now. We have authorization for specimen collection," another researcher said, gesturing at the tranquilized Ravenclaws. "This is legal scientific research. No authorization overrides the territorial ban. This preserve is closed. We answer to higher authority than local magistrates," the lead researcher said dismissively. "Our work is crucial to understanding Ravenclaw biology." David walked closer, hands visible but threatening in their emptiness. "Release them, or what? You'll attack us. We're Protected citizens, you're in exile. Touching us would mean execution. David smiled without humor. I don't need to touch you. He whistled. The pack emerged from the tree line, 23 Ravenclaws moving. Coordinated silence, they formed a circle around the clearing, blocking all escape routes. The researchers' confidence evaporated. Their weapons were designed to stop a few Ravenclaws, not an entire coordinated pack. Call them off, the lead researcher demanded, fear cracking his voice. They're not mine to command, they're their own beings making their own choices, and you just attacked their family. The Alpha stalked forward, flanked by 2 other large Ravenclaws. It stopped 10 feet from the researchers, close enough for them to see its scars, its teeth, the intelligence burning in its eyes. What do you want? The lead researcher asked David, unable to take his eyes off. The Alpha released the tranquilized Ravenclaws. Leave the forest, don't come back. We can't just leave, our research is too important. David shrugged. Then we wait. My pack can wait for days. Can you? He sat down cross-legged and leaned back against a tree. The Ravenclaws settled into watchful positions around the clearing, patient, calm, absolutely terrifying in their controlled stillness. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The researchers tried to call for extraction, but David had anticipated that. He had damaged their communications array while they were focused on the pack. They tried to move toward their ship. The Ravenclaws shifted position, cutting them off without attacking, just blocking, waiting. By nightfall, the researchers were exhausted and terrified. They had no water except what was in their ship, no food, and the forest around them was full of eyes reflecting their emergency lights. Please, the lead researcher finally said, we'll leave. Just let us go. Release the 3 Ravenclaws first. The researcher opened the cages. The tranquilized Ravenclaws stumbled out. Groggy but alive, their packmates immediately surrounded them, supporting them, checking them for injuries. Now leave, David said, and send a message to whoever authorized this. The Thornback Ranges are under new management, human and Ravenclaw. Together, anyone who threatens this balance will face both of us. The researchers scrambled into their ship. Engines fired. The transport lifted off and disappeared into the night sky. David watched it go and felt the Alpha press against his side. He scratched behind its ears in the spot he had learned it enjoyed. We need to be ready, he said quietly. They'll come back, maybe with more force, maybe with military. The Alpha huffed in response. It understood tone, if not words. That night, David used his emergency beacon to send a message to the Chitauri government. He had been monitoring their frequencies long enough to know how to route it properly. This is David Reed. I'm alive and integrated with the Ravenclaw population of the Thornback Ranges. I'm formally requesting protected status for this preserve and all creatures within it. Any unauthorized entry will be met with resistance. I'm willing to negotiate terms, but the Ravenclaws are not research subjects. They're intelligent beings deserving of respect and autonomy. Contact me if you want to discuss this peacefully. He didn't know if they would listen, didn't know if they would send soldiers or diplomats, but he had drawn a line. The forest was home now, that there was family, and David would protect both with everything he had learned both from Earth and from this strange, beautiful alien world. The Ravenclaws gathered around him, 23 voices joining in a protective chorus. The song echoed through the Thornback ranges, a declaration that these lands belonged to those who understood them. And David, sitting in the center of his pack, added his voice to theirs. Different but harmonious, human and alien singing the same truth. This was home, and home was worth defending. 6 months after his exile, David stood on the ridge overlooking his territory and watched a Chitauri diplomatic vessel descend. It landed in the same clearing where he had first been abandoned. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. The pack gathered behind him. A wall of muscle and loyalty. They had grown to 30 Ravenclaws now. Word had spread through the forest. Packs that had fought each other for generations were learning a new way, David's way. The vessel's door opened. 3 Chitauri emerged. 2 were magistrates David recognized from his trial. The third was someone new wearing diplomatic robes, marked with authority symbols. David walked down the ridge slowly. Pack followed at a distance, watchful, but not threatening. He had taught them patience. They had taught him belonging. David Reed, the diplomat said, his translator rendering the clicking speech into words David understood. I am Ambassador Thrix. We need to talk. Then talk, David replied, but keep your weapons holstered and your distance respectful. The Ravenclaws don't like sudden movements. The magistrates looked nervous. The ambassador seemed more curious than afraid. Your message was received. The unauthorized research team filed complaints, but our investigation found they violated multiple protocols. They've been sanctioned. That's a start. We're prepared to offer you a full pardon, Ambassador Thrix continued. All charges dropped, free passage off this world, compensation for your suffering. You can return to human space. David had known this was coming. He had thought about it during long nights by the fire, surrounded by warm bodies and the sounds of the forest. What about them? He gestured to the Ravenclaws. The preserve will remain protected. No more research expeditions without proper authorization. We've learned from your example that Ravenclaws are more complex than we understood. That's not enough. The magistrate stiffened. Ambassador Thrix tilted his head. What do you want to? Full protected status, not just for Ravenclaws, but for the entire ecosystem. No tourism, no exploitation. No entry without invitation. That's extreme. This preserve has cultural significance for our people. Then observe from orbit like you've been doing. The forest doesn't need visitors, it needs respect. And you, the ambassador asked, what do you need? David looked back at the pack. The alpha watched him with those intelligent eyes. The juvenile, now nearly full-grown, sat beside its mother, the former rival. Alphas had integrated completely. Their packs merged into something stronger than any of them had been alone. I need to know if I can trust you. David said quietly, I need to know if this offer is real or if you're just trying to remove an embarrassment. Ambassador Thrix stepped forward alone, leaving the magistrates behind. It was a gesture of trust or stupidity. David wasn't sure which. You've done something remarkable here. The ambassador said, you've proven that intelligence exists in forms we didn't recognize, that cooperation can transcend biology. The scientific community is fascinated. The diplomatic corps sees opportunities, but there are also those who fear what you represent. Which are you? I'm someone who believes the galaxy is better when we learn from each other, rather than dominate each other. The ambassador paused. Stay, be our liaison. Teach us what you've learned. Help us understand not just raven claws, but how to approach all intelligent life with the respect it deserves. David considered this. I'll stay, but on my terms. The forest remains protected, no exceptions. I'll allow supervised visits for education purposes only. Small groups, respectful behavior. Anyone who threatens the pack answers to me. Agreed. What else? I want resources, tools, medical supplies for when the pack needs them. A way to communicate with the outside if necessary. Done. And I want other humans, people who understand what I'm doing here, who can learn from the raven claws like I have. Ambassador Thrix was quiet for a moment. You want to create a program. I want to show that what happened here wasn't a fluke, that humans have a gift for understanding other species, for building bridges instead of walls. There will be volunteers, scientists, naturalists, people seeking purpose. We can arrange it. David held out his hand, a human gesture the Chitauri had learned to recognize. Ambassador Thrix extended a limb, and they shook. Behind them the pack relaxed, the tension and the clearing eased. Over the next month, changes came to the Thornback Ranges. A small research station was built at the preserve's edge, far from the pack's core territory. Supplies arrived, medical equipment, tools David had requested. And 3 humans arrived, volunteers who had heard about David's story and wanted to learn his methods. He taught them what his grandfather had taught him: patience, observation, respect, the language of predators that transcended species. 2 of the volunteers integrated with other Ravenclaw packs. The 3rd worked with the spineback crawlers in the canopy, creatures David had only begun to understand. 5 years passed. The Thornback Ranges became famous across Chitauri space and beyond. The preserve where humans and apex predators lived as equals, where intelligence was measured not by technology but by empathy. David rarely left the forest anymore. His hair had grown long, his skin was weathered, he moved like a raven claw, now fluid and aware. The alpha, graying around the muzzle, still led the pack. Its broken spike had become a symbol of wisdom among the raven claws, battle scars, and survival. The juvenile from the thorned vines had become a strong hunter, leading its own hunting parties. It still greeted David with a head bump every morning. Chitauri students came to observe from designated blinds. They watched David teach young Ravenclaws to use tools, watch the pack coordinate hunts using strategies no one had documented before, watched predator and human share food, space, and trust. One evening, David sat by his fire while recording a message to send to Earth. Documentary crew had requested an interview. People ask me what I learned here, he said to the camera. They want to know the secret to taming wild creatures, but that's the wrong question. I didn't tame anyone. I joined them. I learned their language and they learned mine. We found common ground. The alpha settled beside him, its weight familiar and comforting. Earth's oldest law isn't survival of the fittest, it's adaptation. It's finding your place in the ecosystem, and respecting every other creature's place. 2. Humans survived on Earth not because we were the strongest predators. We survived because we learned to cooperate with each other, with wolves that became dogs, with the land itself. He scratched the alpha behind its ears. That law works here too, on alien worlds with alien creatures. Intelligence recognizes intelligence. Loyalty answers loyalty, and family, real family, transcends species. The pack began their evening song. David joined in, his voice blending with theirs, human and Ravenclaw singing the same truth to the darkening sky. The documentary crew would later say it was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard, a chorus of different voices, finding harmony, proof that the universe was bigger and more wonderful than any of them had imagined. David ended the recording and leaned back against the alphas. Warm bulk, tomorrow would bring new challenges, more students to teach, more territory to protect, more bridges to build between species. But tonight he was home, surrounded by family, living proof that exile could become belonging, that punishment could transform into purpose, and that sometimes the wildest places teach the most important lessons about what it means to be civilized. The stars emerged above the thornback ranges, same stars that shone on Earth, just viewed from a different angle. David watched them and smiled. He had traveled across the galaxy to learn what his grandfather had tried to teach him all those years ago in Montana. Respect the wild, understand the predator, earn your place in the pack, and never, ever underestimate the power of patient silence and Earth's oldest law. Adapt, survive, and thrive together.